The Industrial Sales Solution by Don Cooper. Chapter 1. The Dilemma with Industrial Sales. In the industrial work field, be it construction, maintenance, or inspections, anything to do with an industrial facility, the work itself tends to be highly technical. Even the most commoditized items have very specific client requirements in terms of the kinds of materials that are authorized and the engineering that must go into those solutions. Quality, safety, even the way customers must manage logistics and shipping. Everything about industrial work has critically specific requirements and specifications. The entire supply and solution chains are very technical. All the clients in the industrial space, whether buying the simplest commodity such as hand towels and gloves to expensive compressors, clients will always tend towards the technical. The technicality doesn't stop with the buyers. It is found both in terms of execution, the way those services are going to be provided, as well as the ways the equipment is bought. The buyer's side is hugely technical for the client. This leads to almost everyone in the supply chain side of the industrial market, and the leadership of those companies needing a laser-like focus on technical competency. This leaves every aspect of a supplier's business being driven by meeting client needs around all technical aspects of the work. Everything from engineering to equipment readiness, safety, operations, planning, even finance in a supplier's organization must meet specific requirements for the client. Those requirements make it extremely important that everything in the business follow a process. The strange thing in the industrial world is that it's all about processes. The cost of no process sales. Having worked in this field for many years, I can safely say most suppliers in the industrial space, particularly contractors and many of the material suppliers, don't have a sales process. Why is that? They don't view selling as a process like they do every other part of the business. This is a very dangerous position. Because of their lack of process, most supplier and contractor organizations make the same mistake. They push highly technical people into sales positions. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. Let's say you have someone selling pipe, compressors, or large pressurized vessels into the technical space. Their first instinct is to push people who have a ton of technical knowledge into that role of salesperson. On the flip side, they may pick someone with no technical knowledge. Usually they are a real people person if they are a good salesperson. The problem with that is the company ends up with something close to a public relations rep. They are great as a friendly face, but they're not very technical. Both strategies, putting a technical person into a sales role or putting a people person who isn't technical into a sales role, will cost the company money. Part of the cost of having the people in the wrong roles is because of the huge ramp-up period before they are capable of selling. Looking at it from the technical person's point of view, they need to get comfortable with people and will need to quickly learn methods of selling. From the non-technical people person point of view, they will need anywhere from 3 to 6 months, sometimes a year or longer, to learn the technicalities of what it is they're selling. Remember, they must learn all the technical aspects from their company's point of view, as well as the standpoint of all the customer requirements. That won't happen overnight. Here's how companies usually end up dealing with this situation. Their approach is to look at everything as technical, and you will either need to 1. Have technical people who don't know how to sell in sales roles, requiring long ramp-up times to learn how to sell. 2. Find a very traditional extroverted salesperson that will need to learn all the technical work before they can interact with customers. Both of those options mean there's a long period of ineffectiveness. This ramp-up period is essentially making a bet that the salesperson will be effective within a few months. That bet rarely pays off quickly, if at all. Costs of doing business. One of the immediately measurable costs is you're going to have at least a year extension in your sales cycle before you see the salesperson producing. That's a long time to wait for the results your business plan put in place to justify that investment in a salesperson. You have a full calendar year at minimum before this person gives you evidence they're going to be a worthwhile investment. It costs money to wait around. That's a real significant cost. For some businesses, this can be extreme. That's an entire year of waiting around to see if this person starts to build momentum. If what the company is selling is more complex, or the customer's buying cycle is quite long, you might not have evidence of good performance for 18 to 24 months or longer. There's a huge risk in undertaking that cost, because the cost is there, but you can't see it paying any returns. You're paying for sales work to be done, and you may not have a way to measure success for a couple of years. Time cost. The other cost is, while this person is learning either sales skills or technical skills, there's a significant draw on the management and leadership teams. It doesn't stop there, as the rest of the organization will be drawn in trying to get that person up to speed. They have either invested their focus on teaching a technical person sales skill, which, for the most part, can be learned outside of the organization, or you have people come to the table with batteries included and already have good selling capability. If not, you have a long learning curve when you have a person who has selling ability and no technical know-how in the industry. The indirect costs can include a lot of uncertainty, as well as some real dollars spent with a heavy draw on the organization. Reputation cost. Finally, particularly with the salespeople who come to the table without technical skills, there's a risk to the company's reputation in front of the customer. If you put that salesperson out in front of highly technical clients too early, there will be consequences. They may not represent your company, your brand, your values, or even your technical competency in a way that is in line with what you intend to accomplish. That reputational cost is hard to measure in dollars, but for most people in leadership roles, you can feel it in your gut. I'm not quite comfortable this person is ready to represent what our company stands for. There are a lot of different challenges with either strategy because both come with a long ramp-up time to get them to perform in a way that gets the desired outcome. There must be a shift in focus, and everyone in an industrial selling environment on the supplier and contractor side needs to realize one thing. A fundamental shift in thinking will be required, because the reality is sales are like every other aspect of a supplier's business. There is a process, a natural flow. It must have a step-by-step process to ensure a beneficial outcome for both sides. What happens when people fail to recognize there's a process to selling? It will always lead to extensions in the sales cycle and a lengthy ramp-up period. And don't forget all the other direct and indirect costs that come with that long ramp-up period. Those must be added to the cost. The underlying problem. The problem is most suppliers in the industrial space as a business view the world very technically, which creates a blind spot for them. They don't understand making a sale as a process, just like operations and engineering. The big pivot point opportunity is companies need to realize to have a sales process they must first define it. It needs to be teachable. Once it's teachable, it can be scalable, and once it's scalable, it can be repeatable. But the very first step is they must uncover their sales process. To do that will require some leadership and some direct thinking. In the industrial space, the mindset shift that everyone needs to make is that a sale is a process. They need to think about selling in the same way they look at finance, engineering, or operations. Procedures and skills can be learned and developed, but they first must be defined. Once defined and taught, they must be practiced, mastered, and then followed by everyone in the organization. When they can define their sales process, they will shorten the sales cycle, which will dramatically change the outcomes in the ramp-up period. This holds true regardless of which type of strategy they choose in terms of the kinds of salespeople they hire. Whether they choose technical people to move into sales, or relationship salespeople to learn the technical. If they develop a mindset that everything about their selling strategy is a process that can be defined, learned, and scaled, they can shorten their process and get a quick return on investment. They will gain a much quicker turnaround in seeing an effective performance from those salespeople. Wrong people, wrong place. When you put technical people, like those who work in operations or engineering, into a sales role, they almost always get themselves into a position where they're behaving in a transactional manner. This happens because those individuals tend to view the world through executing work and think about things in a very technical way. They believe that selling is about getting an inquiry or being asked for a quote. Or they think success in sales is getting a request for a proposal. Unfortunately, getting on the bid list is not selling. That is being a commodity. That is transactional, and it's the lowest form of value creation you can create for both you and your client. On the customer side, they have very technical people who are also facilitating the traditional request for a quote or request for proposal process. The customers are looking at technicalities. They're not necessarily looking at how to think differently about the problem they're facing. They're not necessarily thinking about the best value. They don't know how to define the best value because the people who are on the RFP side are what I call a stakeholder, a technicality stakeholder, or a specification stakeholder. They're one of about 6 or 7 different types of personalities that need to be involved from a client perspective to be able to uncover value. You have a technical person matched up with a very nice technical person, and it becomes a transaction and a low value creation for both the buyer and the selling organization. It's a race to the bottom in terms of meeting minimally acceptable standards of performance and minimum value for all. Now that's what happens when you match technical people up with technical people. On the flip side, when you put a salesperson that has no technical ability in front of customers, what ends up happening is a lot of wasted energy. Non-technical people will traditionally go down the same path. They will be out trying to knock on doors to see if anybody can see them because they want to get on the bid list. They want to try and get customers to let them give a quote. And the same thing happens repeatedly. The frustrations and the pain that happens are different for each group. Because one group is focused on technical aspects, they are not creating any value by understanding all the people involved. So they aren't focused on coming up with a better way to provide that service solution. On the traditional sales side, they end up wasting a lot of time talking to lots of people within a customer's organization who are not interested. They burn a tremendous number of sales calories in terms of days and hours wasted talking to the wrong people. That non-process way of trying to sell becomes very ineffective and frustrating. Wasted time equals failed value. Both groups approach sales from different points of view, but they get to the same place. One fails to create value because they're focused on the technical aspects and the transaction. The other wastes a lot of time talking to all the wrong people. They both get to the same place, a bid and a 3 bidders in a buy situation. There's no value created for the client. There's no value created for the selling organization. They're selling on sameness, which is the very lowest form of value for everyone. Too much talking plus not enough listening equals missed opportunities. All too often, depending on what they're selling and the complexities involved, the salesperson will hit a point where they don't know what they're talking about. It's at this point they quite often trip on their tongues and panic. What happens with both, particularly with salespeople who are uncomfortable they don't know enough, is a part of their brain called the amygdala kicks in and puts them in panic mode. They start having reflex responses, trying to say something for the sake of having something to say. Salespeople like to talk. Salespeople without a process haven't necessarily developed either the skill or the confidence to ask the right questions and then shut up and listen. What you find in traditional relationship-based salespeople who are trying to go out and talk to everyone they can is they do an awful lot of talking and not enough listening. They don't learn how they can help the client. It's all because of a lack of technical capability in the space. Particularly in that ramp-up period, the salespeople will overpromise and underdeliver. Non-salespeople would view that as the traditional sales guy will say anything, but it really boils down to brain science. The salesperson's amygdala kicks in. It's an emotional center in the brain where they're afraid to be quiet. They don't know what to ask, so they need to keep talking. Untrained salespeople will often sound or end up sounding completely incompetent and unconfident in what they are presenting. When this happens, they will stumble on their words. Now remember, the kinds of clients we're talking about are running power plants and refineries. These clients have facilities that are running 24 hours a day. They're not sitting at a desk waiting for a salesperson to call or show up. They have their jobs to do. If you don't have something valuable to talk to that customer about, they're going to very quickly shut you down because they're not interested. They have a facility to maintain. They have engineering to do. They have things to fix on their own. If you can't have conversations where they're getting value, then tons of opportunity is missed. I've had a lot of salespeople on my team who did very little listening. I would do a review and listen in on their phone calls, and the customer was giving them clues and cues to the kinds of things they needed. But because the salesperson was so fixated on their agenda of, "Here's what I want to tell you," they would miss very clear indications that expose other parts of the business the customer needs. All about me. I see this happening every day out in the world of sales. The salesperson is so fixed on their agenda they won't hear what the customer is saying. It's an interesting scenario when someone is panicking, and they want to talk as much as they can, instead of having the habit of asking a question and listening with the intent to understand. When a salesperson is operating in panic mode, they miss tons of business opportunities because their mouth is open, but their ears are shut. There is a better way. A sales process, that is designed to create value for both your client and for you. In the following chapters, I will show you how.